Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to the YouTube channel of Books and Culture. Welcome to the the third live session of our guided reading of Charlotte Bronte's novel, The Professor. How are you today? I have my tea ready for our session. Smells good. And I have my copy of the book here, and everything's ready for us to get started. Um, so, welcome back to this project. This is session 3. So, just to refresh our memories, what has happened so far. Last time we read chapters 2, 3, and 4. And where are we at in William Crimsworth's journey? William Crimsworth is the protagonist of The Professor. So let's see. Let's talk about what we read last time. So William wants to thrive in life by himself, right? He has cut all help with his maternal uncles, who are wealthy men, and one of them is a nobleman, but they treat his mother horribly, abandoned her just because she had married William's father, who was a man of trade. And remember, at the time, the people that became rich because of trade, because of business, the so-called nouveaux riches, they were not taken by the aristocratic classes with good eyes, right? They were not seen with good eyes. Of course, prejudice, right? So they did not approve of the marriage between William's mother with his father. So when William learned about that, he decided to cut all relationships with his maternal uncles, and decided to go find his 10 years older brother, Edward, who works in trade. So he wanted to follow his father's footsteps and try to make his life in trade, although he has a very poetic mind, very poetic soul. He wants to challenge his intellect. He gets moved by beautiful landscapes. But that's not what he finds when he comes to, and of course he knew about it. That's not what he finds when he comes to work at X. So Charlotte Brontë does not name the place. That was common in Victorian literature. So instead of creating a fictional place or referring to a real name, a real place, they just use an X. So as he arrives there, it's very interesting. We talked about it last time, how Charlotte creates this atmosphere. You can almost see it. She creates this very, I would say, gray imagery. She says of the landscape, she uses words like steam, trade, machinery, permanent vapor, and this is great, chimneys vomiting soot, quivering through thick brick walls with the commotion of iron bowels. Can you see that? Right? Very gray, very dull, very mechanic landscape, which Edward is passionate about, but really not William's cup of tea. So they are very different, the two. And also, they hadn't seen each other for a long time, but it was not a good reunion, those two. Edward, the older brother, feels, and he has the resolution, that he is superior to his brother. And instead of treating him like a member of the family, which he is, there are no brotherly bonds. It's just a business relationship. So he hires William to work as his second clerk. And he does not offer any privileges, very low wages, terrible working conditions, very cold, no fire. He had to make do with finding lodgings in the city with this minimum wage, um, because Edward would not have him in his mansion. So um, it was clear from the beginning that it was an employer-employee relationship. But more than that, we'll see how Edward abuses William. So it is more like a master-slave relationship. And this is going to, let's say, catapult this chapters we'll be reading today. We read chapter, I believe it was chapter 3. It was Edward's party, it was his birthday, and he, as was the custom, invited everyone to his mansion. And it was really heartbreaking to read how William felt. He was secluded and isolated on purpose during the whole party. No one talked to him. It was very hard for him to be there. But at this party, he met Mr. Hunsden, a young tradesman who is different from the others. He's not like Edward. He likes to reflect and will be more important later on in the novel, as we'll discuss. Also today, we'll discuss Mr. Hunsden more. He's quite an interesting character. I like him. And some things he says are quite funny. Not funny in like a laughing way, but funny in like interesting way, if you know what I mean. I'll say some examples later on. Look at how William felt. This is an extract from the book that I copied here so I could read it out to you. He felt. It's in first person narrative, right? Excluded from every glimpse of the sunshine of life, I began to feel like a plant growing in humid darkness out of the slimy walls of a well. So you can tell that Charlotte is great at creating this poetic imagery, right? Literary imagery. Just imagine a very dark, slimy well, humid, and this tiny slimy plant growing in that hostile environment. That's how he felt. You see. And with a conversation with Mr. Hunsden, that really opens William's eyes. That was the end of chapter 4 last time. William said that in reply to one of Mr. Hunsden's questions, he replies that he does not want to be a fossil. Mr. Hunsden said that when a man endures patiently what ought to be unendurable, he is a fossil. And that conversation really hit home, and that conversation made William realize that he needed to take action, that he's not happy being a tradesman. That's not where he belongs, especially because of the relationship with his brother. Maybe if they had a happy relationship, he would endure it longer and would even feel happy. But all of it piled up, the isolation, the ruthlessness from his brother, the mechanic, dull nature of his work, no challenging of his intellect or fuel of his imagination, that really makes him wonder, what am I doing here? And that he really needs to find purpose in his life. And that's what we'll read about as we read. I notice that in the schedule that I posted on Instagram, I added for today chapters 4, 5, and 6. But we already read chapter 4 last time. So I made this little mistake. So instead, today we're going to read chapters 5 and 6. And next time, we're going to read chapters 7, 8, and 9. Well, and I would also like to remind you that on Monday, the 26th of February, we're going to start with the first and only class that in the course, online live course, Exploring Jane Eyre, a Journey into Victorian Literature. We're going to meet live online virtual classroom live at 5 o'clock p.m. Central European Time on 4 Mondays, starting on the Monday, 26th of February. We are a very nice group so far. There is a maximum of 10 places. I want to make this cozy atmosphere for everyone. And for literary studies, it's important to have enough space for everyone to be able to participate, engage in the discussions, and to also have this cozy, safe environment. So there will be a total of 10 spots, and 9 have been taken. So the classroom is almost full. So if you want to join, you should be quick, very, very quick. Go to the website booksandculture.club and sign up. We start on Monday live. We're going to dig deep into Charlotte Bronte's masterpiece, Jane Eyre. This is one must-read book. It belongs to many lists of must-read books and best books of 19th century Victorian literature all time. So it is a very significant book. And being together in the classes with me, I will offer extra information, contextual information. We're going to look at specific themes, at specific parts of the novel. We're not going to read it together. Those are not guided reading sessions. Those are really literature lessons. And we're going to look at quotes, at some critical interpretations, and I'm sure that will make your reading experience or rereading experience of Jane Eyre very, very rich, right? So join us on Monday. Don't waste time because there's only one more spot. So Monday the 26th, go to booksandculture.club. All right, so let's carry on with our reading of The Professor. If you're watching live, be sure to send me a message. I love to know who's here now and to interact with you guys along the way. If you have questions or comments, please drop them in the messages in the chat, and I will read them as we go. So, chapter 4. So we left William very, very chapter 4, we've already read chapter 4. My apologies. Chapter 5. So we left William feeling very miserable in chapter 4. Okay, chapter 5. There is a climax to everything, to every state of feeling as well as to every position in life. I turn this truism over in my mind as, in the frosty dawn of a January morning, I hurried down the steep and now icy street which descended from Mrs. King's to the Close. The factory work people had preceded me by nearly an hour, and the mill was all lighted up and in full operation when I reached it. I repaired to my post in the counting house as usual. The fire there, but just lit, as yet only smoked. It's always cold there, it feels like, right? Stuyton had not yet arrived. I shut the door and sat down at the desk. My hands, recently washed in half-frozen water, were still numb. I could not write till they had regained vitality. So I went on thinking, and still the theme of my thoughts was the climax. Self-dissatisfaction troubled exceedingly the current of my meditations. Come, William Crimsworth, said my conscience, or whatever it is that within ourselves takes ourselves to task. Come, get a clear notion of what you would have, or what you would not have. You talk of a climax. Pray, has your endurance reached its climax? It's not 4 months old. It hasn't been 4 months that he's working there. So his conscience is telling him, are you that weak? Are you going to give up already? Is this the climax of your endurance? What a fine, resolute fellow you imagine yourself to be when you told Tyndale you would tread in your father's steps, and a pretty treading you are likely to make of it. How well you like X, the city. Just at this moment, how redolent of pleasant associations are its streets, its shops, its warehouses, its factories. How the prospect of this day cheers you. Letter copying till noon, solitary dinner at your lodgings, letter copying till evening. solitude. You see how he's being sarcastic here, right? His own conscience is being sarcastic. Look how the prospect of this day cheers you. But this is not a cheerful day. Letter copying till noon, solitary dinner, more letter copying, more solitude. It's terrible. For you neither find pleasure in Brown's, nor Smith's, nor Nichols, nor Eccles' company. And as to Hunsden, you fancied there was pleasure to be derived from his society. How did you like the taste you had of him last night? Was it sweet? Yet he is a talented and original minded man, and even he does not like you. Your self respect defies you to like him. He has always seen you to disadvantage. He always will see you to disadvantage. Your positions are unequal, and were they on the same level, your minds could not assimilate. Never hope then to gather the honey of friendship out of that thorn guarded plant. Hello, Crimsworth, where are your thoughts tending? You leave the recollection of Hunsden as a bee would a rock, as a bird a desert, and your aspirations spread eager wings toward a land of visions where, now in advancing daylight, in Axe daylight, you dare to dream of congeniality, repose, union. Those three you will never meet in this world. They are angels. The souls of just men made perfect may encounter them in heaven, but your soul will never be made perfect. 8 o'clock strikes, your hands are thought, get to work. You see what he longs for? Something very simple. Congeniality. So he longs for friendship, for companionship. Congeniality, repose, union. That's what he wants to have. And he will never have that in advancing daylight, in X daylight, right? Roberto from Italy is here. Hello, Roberto. Nice to have you. I hope you're enjoying the guided reading sessions. Let me know how you feel about the professor so far. Okay, so his hands thawed. So it was so cold he couldn't move his hands, so he had to wait a little bit. And now the hands are thawed. Time to get to work. 8 o'clock. Work? Why should I work? Said I sullenly. I cannot please though I toil like a slave. Work, work, reiterated the inward voice. I may work, it will do no good. I growled, but nevertheless I drew out a packet of letters and commenced my task. Task thankless and bitter as that of this Israelite crawling over the sun-baked fields of Egypt in search of straw and stubble wherewith to accomplish his tale of bricks. About 10 o'clock I heard Mr. Crimsworth's gig turn into the yard, and in a minute or two he entered the counting-house. You see, he does not refer to his brother as Edward anymore, but as Mr. Crimsworth. So, formal and distant relationship. It was his custom to glance his eye at Steighton and myself, to hang up his mackintosh, stand a minute with his back to the fire, and then walk out. Today he did not deviate from his usual habits. The only difference was that when he looked at me, his brow, instead of being merely hard, was surly. His eye, instead of being cold, was fierce. He studied me a minute or two longer than usual, but went out in silence. 12 o'clock arrived. The bell rang for a suspension of labor. The work people went off to their dinners. Steighton, too, departed, desiring me to lock the counting house door and take the key with me. I was tying up a bundle of papers and putting them in their place, preparatory to closing my desk, when Crimsworth reappeared at the door and, entering, closed it behind him. You stay here a minute, said he in a deep, brutal voice, while his nostrils distended and his eye shot a spark of sinister fire. Like a dragon, right? He arrives like a dragon. Alone with Edward, I remembered our relationship, and remembering that, forgot the difference of position. I put away deference and careful forms of speech. I answered with simple brevity. It is time to go home, I said, turning the key in my desk. You'll stay here, he reiterated, and take your hand off that key. Leave it in the lock. Why? Asked I. What cause is there for changing my usual plans? Do as I order, was the answer, and no questions. You are my servant, obey me. What have you been about? He was going on in the same breath when an abrupt pause announced that rage had for the moment got the better of articulation. You may look if you wish to know, I replied. There is the open desk. There are the papers. Confound your insolence. What have you been about? Your work, and have done it well. Hypocrite and twaddler, smooth faced, snivelling greasehorn. This last term is, I believe, purely Shire, so purely from that region, and alludes to the horn of black, rancid whale oil, usually to be seen suspended to cartwheels and employed for greasing the same. Come, Edward Grimsworth, enough of this. It is time you and I wound up accounts. I have now given your service 3 months' trial, and I find it the most nauseous slavery under the sun. Seek another clerk. I stay no longer. What? Do you dare to give me notice? Stop at least for your wages. He took down the heavy gig whip hanging beside his mackintosh, pulls out the whip, and says, Stop at least for your wages. I permitted myself to laugh with a degree of scorn I took no pains to temper or hide. His fury boiled up, and when he had sworn half a dozen vulgar, impious oaths, without, however, venturing to lift the whip, he continued, I found you out and know you thoroughly. You mean whining lick spittle. What have you been saying all over Axe about me? Answer me that. You. I have neither inclination nor temptation to talk about you. You lie. It is your practice to talk about me. It is your constant habit to make public complaint of the treatment you receive at my hands. You have gone and told it far and near that I give you low wages and knock you about like a dog. I wish you were a dog. I'd set to this minute and never stir from the spot till I'd cut every strip of flesh from your bones with this whip. Look how aggressive he is in his tone, his menaces, his holding the whip. So William has had enough. So he's saying he's leaving. He flourished his tool, the whip. The end of the lash just touched my forehead. A warm, excited thrill ran through my veins. My blood seemed to give a bound, and then raced fast and hot along its channels. I got up nimbly, came round to where he stood, and faced him. Down with your whip, said I, and explain this instant what you mean. Sirrah, to whom are you speaking? Sirrah is an expression very obsolete now, but it was quite common in the 19th century and used by someone superior or feeling superior, like Edward, to like a boy or a servant, right? So that's the kind of word he uses to refer to his own brother. So he asks, to whom are you speaking? To you. There is no one else present, I think. You say I have been calumniating you, complaining of your low wages and bad treatment. Give your grounds for these assertions. Crimsworth had no dignity, and when I sternly demanded an explanation, he gave one in a loud, scolding voice. Grounds, you shall have them, and turn to the light that I may see your brazen face blush black when you hear yourself proved to be a liar and a hypocrite. At a public meeting in the town hall yesterday, I had the pleasure of hearing myself insulted by the speaker opposed to me in the question under discussion, by allusion to my private affairs, by cant about monsters without natural affection, family despots, and such trash. And when I rose to answer, I was met by a shout from the filthy mob, where the mention of your name enabled me at once to detect the quarter in which this base attack had originated. When I looked round, I saw the treacherous villain Hunsden acting as fugleman, a spokesperson. So he was the one. Hunsden was the one there talking to the crowd about how Crimsworth treated his servants very, very badly. I detected you in close conversation with Hunsden at my house a month ago, and I know that you were at Hunsden's room last night. Deny it if you dare. Oh, I shall not deny it. And if Hunsden hounded on the people to hiss you, he did quite right. You deserve popular execration, for a worse man, a harder master, a more brutal brother than you are has seldom existed. Sirrah, sirrah, reiterated Crimsworth, and to complete his apostrophe, he cracked the whip straight over my head. A minute sufficed to wrest it from him, break it into pieces, and throw it under the grate. He made a headlong rush at me, which I evaded, and said, Touch me, and I will have you up before the nearest magistrate. Men like Crimsworth, if firmly and calmly resisted, always abate something of their exorbitant insolence. He had no mind to be brought before a magistrate, and I suppose he saw I meant what I said. After an odd and long stare at me, at once bull-like and amazed, he seemed to bethink himself that, after all, his money gave him sufficient superiority over a beggar like me, and that he had in his hands a surer and more dignified mode of revenge than the somewhat hazardous one of personal chastisement. Take your hat, said he, take what belongs to you, and go out at that door. Get away to your parish, you pauper. Beg, steal, starve, get transported, do what you like, but at your peril venture again into my sight. If ever I hear of your setting foot on an inch of ground belonging to me, I'll hire a man to cane you. It is not likely you have the chance. Once off your premises, what temptation can I have to return to them? I leave a prison. I leave a tyrant. I leave what is worse than the worst that can lie before me, so no fear of my coming back. Finally, he stands his ground. He calls his brother a tyrant and tells he will never come back. Go, or I'll make you, exclaimed Crimsworth. I walked deliberately to my desk, took out such of its contents as were my own property, put them in my pocket, locked the desk, and placed the key on the top. What are you abstracting from that desk? Demanded the mill owner. Leave all behind in its place, or I'll send for a policeman to search you. Look sharp about it, then, said I, and I took down my hat, threw on my gloves, and walked leisurely out of the counting house, walked out of it to enter it no more. I recollect that when the mill bell rang the dinner hour, before Mr. Crimsworth entered and the scene above related took place, I had had rather a sharp appetite, and had been waiting somewhat impatiently to hear the signal of feeding time. I forgot it now, however. The images of potatoes and roast mutton were effaced from my mind by the stir and tumult which the transaction of the last half hour had there excited. I only thought of walking, that the action of my muscles might harmonize with the action of my nerves. And walk I did, fast and far. How could I do otherwise? A load was lifted off my heart. I felt light and liberated. I had got away from Big Ben Close without breach of resolution, without injury to my self-respect. I had not forced circumstances. Circumstances had freed me. Life was again open to me. No longer was its horizon limited by the high black walls surrounding Crimsworth. See how he used to see how he visualized his life, his horizon, as limited by the high black wall surrounding Crimsworthville. So literally, yeah, there was a wall, but also figuratively. So this black wall encircling him, um, making him prisoner, making him suffocate with this um, mechanic way of life. Fossilizing him. Let's use the same image that Mr. Huntsman used. 2 hours had elapsed before my sensations had so far subsided as to leave me calm enough to remark for what wider and clearer boundaries I had exchanged that sooty girdle. When I did look up, lo, straight before me lay Grovetown, a village of villas about 5 miles out of X. The short winter day, as I perceived from the far declined sun, was already approaching its close. A chill frost mist was rising from the river on which X stands, and along whose banks the road I had taken lay. It dimmed the earth, but did not obscure the clear icy blue of the January sky. There was a great stillness near and far. The time of the day favored tranquillity as the people were all employed within doors. The hour of evening release from the factories not being yet arrived. A sound of full flowing water alone pervaded the air, for the river was deep and abundant, swelled by the melting of a late snow. I stood a while, leaning over a wall and looking down at the current. Now imagine him leaning on a wall and looking at the landscape. Remember how he was very sensitive and very connected with nature in a very romantic way. Romantic, I mean, referring to romanticism. So really connecting with the magic, with the beauty of nature. Look how he describes it. Now that he's feeling free, he can find that connection again. He was seeing life through this gray smoke, through this gray filter encompassed by this black wall. Now that this was lifted, he can go back to looking at life like he used to before, right? I watched the rapid rush of its waves. I desired memory to take a clear and permanent impression of the scene and treasure it for future years. Grovetown church clock struck 4. Looking up, I beheld the last of that day's sun, glinting red through the leafless boughs of some very old oak trees surrounding the church. Its light colored and characterized the picture as I wished. It's very picturesque, with the last rays of the sun, with the church bells. I paused yet a moment till the sweet, slow sound of the bell had quite died out of the air. Then, ear, eye, and feeling satisfied, I quitted the wall and once more turned my face towards X. And that's chapter 5. So he breaks with his brother. He takes agency over his life again. He needs time to think, to walk, to subside his feelings. He reconnects with nature, and he walks back to X because he has some matters to arrange, but he is decided to start a new chapter in his life. And let's see what happens in chapter 6. I re-entered the town a hungry man. The dinner I had forgotten recurred seductively to my recollection, and it was with a quick step and sharp appetite I ascended the narrow street leading to my lodgings. It was dark when I opened the front door and walked into the house. I wondered how my fire would be. The night was cold, and I shuddered at the prospect of a grate full of sparkless cinders. This is also very symbolic. Remember last time we talked about his lodgings as being always cold, the fire very dim or almost dead with only ashes. And that's the hopelessness that he felt. But to my joyful surprise, I found on entering my sitting room a good fire and a clean hearth. So there you go. There is hope. There is fire. There's warmth. There's light. I had hardly noticed this phenomenon when I became aware of another subject for wonderment. The chair I usually occupied near the hearth was already filled. A person sat there with his arms folded on his chest and his legs stretched out on the rug. Short-sighted as I am, doubtful as was the gleam of the firelight, a moment's examination enabled me to recognize in this person my acquaintance, Mr. Hunsden. I could not, of course, be much pleased to see him, considering the manner in which I had parted from him the night before, and as I walked to the hearth, stirred the fire, and said coolly, "Good evening," my demeanor evinced as little cordiality as I felt. Yet I wondered in my own mind what had brought him there, and I wondered also what motives had induced him to interfere so actively between me and Edward. It was to him, it appeared, that I owed my welcome dismissal. Still, I could not bring myself to ask him questions, to show any eagerness of curiosity. If he chose to explain, he might, but the explanation should be a perfectly voluntary one on his part. I thought he was entering upon it. You owe me a debt of gratitude, were his first words. Do I? Said I. I hope it is not a large one, for I am much too poor to charge myself with heavy liabilities of any kind. Then declare yourself bankrupt at once, for this liability is a ton weight at least. When I came in, I found your fire out, and I had it lit again. He lighted the fire. So see the the literal meaning and also the metaphorical figurative meaning. He gave the light and made that sulky drab of a servant stay and blow at it with the bellows till it had burned up properly. Now say, thank you. Not till I have had something to eat. I can thank nobody while I am so famished. I rang the bell and ordered tea and some cold meat. Cold meat! Exclaimed Hunsden as the servant closed the door. What a glutton you are, man! Meat with tea! You'll die of eating too much. No, Mr. Hunsden, I shall not. I felt a necessity for contradicting him. I was irritated with hunger and irritated at seeing him there, and irritated at the continued roughness of his manner. It is overeating that makes you so ill-tempered, said he. How do you know? I demanded. It is like you to give a pragmatical opinion without being acquainted with any of the circumstances of the case. I have had no dinner. What I said was petulant and snappish enough, and Hunsden only replied by looking in my face and laughing. Poor thing, he whined after a pause. It has had no dinner, has it? What, I suppose its master would not let it come home. Did Crimsworth order you to fast by way of punishment, William? No, Mr. Hunsden. Fortunately, at this sulky juncture, tea was brought in, and I fell to upon some bread and butter and cold beef directly. Having cleared a plateful, I became so far humanized as to intimate to Mr. Hunsden that he need not sit there staring, but might come to the table and do as I did if he liked. But I don't like in the least, said he, and therewith he summoned the servant by a fresh pull of the bell rope, and intimated a desire to have a glass of toast and water. And some more coal, he added. Mr. Crimsworth shall keep a good fire while I stay. His orders being executed, he wheeled his chair round to the table so as to be opposite me. Well, he proceeded, you are out of work, I suppose? Yes, said I, and not disposed to show the satisfaction I felt on this point. I, yielding to the whim of the moment, took up the subject as though I considered myself aggrieved rather than benefited by what had been done. Yes, thanks to you, I am. Crimsworth turned me off at a minute's notice owing to some interference of yours at a public meeting, I understand. Huh, what, he mentioned that? He observed me signalling the lads, did he? What had he to say about his friend Hunsden? Anything sweet? He called you a treacherous villain. Oh, he hardly knows me yet. I'm one of those shy people who don't come out all at once, and he's only just beginning to make my acquaintance. But he'll find I've some good qualities, excellent ones. The Hunsdens were always unrivaled at tracking a rascal. A downright dishonorable villain is their natural prey. They could not keep off him wherever they went, wherever they met him. You used the word pragmatical just now. That word is the property of our family. It has been applied to us from generation to generation. We have fine noses for abuses. We scent a scoundrel a mile off. We are reformers born, radical reformers, and it was impossible for me to live in the same town with Crimsworth, to come into weekly contact with him, to witness some of his conduct to you, for whom personally I care nothing. I only consider the brutal injustice with which he violated your natural claim to equality. I say it was impossible for me to be thus situated and not feel the angel or the demon of my race at work within me. I followed my instinct, opposed a tyrant, and broke a chain. And there you go. Good of Mr. Hunsden to take down the tyrant, even though it had nothing to do with how he felt about William, right? He says, for whom, yeah, for you, for whom I personally care nothing. I only consider the brutal injustice with which Crimsworth violated your natural claim to equality. All beings have a natural claim to equality, and if Crimsworth went against that, then Hunston has a problem with it. That's very good. Now, this speech interested me much, both because it brought out Hunston's character and because it explained his motives. It interested me so much that I forgot to reply to it and sat silent, pondering over a throng of ideas it had suggested. "Are you grateful to me?" he asked presently. In fact, I was grateful, or almost so, and I believe I half liked him at the moment, notwithstanding his proviso that what he had done was not out of regard for me. But human nature is perverse. Impossible to answer his blunt question in the affirmative, so I disclaimed all tendency to gratitude and advised him, if he expected any reward for his championship, to look for it in a better world, as he was not likely to meet with it here. In reply, he termed me a dry-hearted aristocratic scamp, whereupon I again charged him with having taken the bread out of my mouth. "Your bread was dirty, man," cried Hunston, "dirty and unwholesome. It came through the hands of a tyrant, for I tell you Crimsworth is a tyrant to his work people, a tyrant to his clerks, and will some day be a tyrant to his wife." "Nonsense. Bread is bread and a salary is a salary. I've lost mine, and through your means." "There is sense in what you say, after all," rejoined Hunston. "I must say I am rather agreeably surprised to hear you make so practical an observation as that last. I had imagined now, from my previous observation of your character, that the sentimental delight you would have taken in your newly regained liberty would, for a while at least, have effaced all ideas of forethought and prudence. I think better of you for looking steadily to the needful." "Looking steadily to the needful, how can I do otherwise? I must live, and to live I must have what you call the needful, which I can only get by working. I repeat it, you have taken my work from me." "What do you mean to do?" pursued Hunsden coolly. "You have influential relations. I suppose they'll soon provide you with another place." "Influential relations? Who? I should like to know their names." "The Seacombs." "Stuff! I have cut them." Hunsden looked at me incredulously. "I have," said I, "and that definitively. You must mean they have cut you, William." "As you please. They offered me their patronage on condition of my entering the church. I declined both the terms and the recompense. I withdrew from my cold uncles and preferred throwing myself into my elder brother's arms, from whose affectionate embrace I am now torn by the cruel intermeddling of a stranger. Of yourself, in short." And here, of course, he's being sarcastic when he mentions his brother's affectionate embrace. I could not repress a half smile as I said this. A similar demi-manifestation of feeling appeared at the same moment on Hunsden's lips. "Oh, I see," said he, looking into my eyes, and it was evident he did see right down into my heart. Having sat a minute or two with his chin resting on his hand, that would be weird, right? With his chin resting on his hand, diligently occupied in the continued perusal of my countenance, he went on. "Seriously, have you then nothing to expect from the Seacombs?" "Yes, rejection and repulsion. Why do you ask me twice? How can hands stained with the ink of a counting house, soiled with the grease of a wool warehouse, ever again be permitted to come into contact with aristocratic palms?" Remember I told you about the aristocracy's disdain for money coming out of business, trade activities. So after he has worked there, and as he puts it, what's the word? Stained his hands with the ink of a counting house and soiled his hands with the grease of a wool warehouse, his aristocratic uncles would not take him back. He was soiled, right? He was tainted by trade. There would be a difficulty, no doubt. Still, you are such a complete Seacombe in appearance, feature, language, almost manner. I wonder they should disown you. They have disowned me, so talk no more about it. Do you regret it, William? No. Why not, lad? Because they are not people with whom I could ever have any sympathy. I say you are one of them. That merely proves that you know nothing at all about it. I am my mother's son, but not my uncle's nephew. Still, one of your uncles is a lord, though rather an obscure and not a very wealthy one, and the other a right honourable. You should consider worldly interest. Nonsense, Mr. Hudson. You know or may know that even had I desired to be submissive to my uncles, I could not have stooped with a good enough grace ever to have won their favour. I should have sacrificed my own comfort and not have gained their patronage in return. Very likely. So you calculated your wisest plan was to follow your own devices at once? Exactly. I must follow my own devices. I must, till the day of my death, because I can neither comprehend, adopt, nor work out those of other people. Hunsden yawned. Well, said he, in all this I see but one thing clearly. That is, that the whole affair is no business of mine. And this is an example of how I find him funny in a way that is not really meant to be funny, but it is. Like when he said that he just did that not out of any regard for him. That was funny also here, that he comes to the conclusion that this is no business of his, although he's the one that got William fired. He stretched himself and again yawned, like bored. I have nothing to do with this. I wonder what time it is, he went on. I have an appointment for 7 o'clock. 3/4 past 6 by my watch. Well, then I'll go. He got up. You'll not meddle with trade again? Said he, leaning his elbow on the mantelpiece. No, I think not. You would be a fool if you did. Probably, after all, you think better of your uncle's proposal and go into the church. A singular regeneration must take place in my whole inner and outer man before I do that. A good clergyman is one of the best of men. So he does not consider himself one of the best of men, right? Indeed, do you think so? Interrupted Hunsden scoffingly. I do, and no mistake. But I have not the peculiar points which go to make a good clergyman, and rather than adopt a profession for which I have no vocation, I would endure extremities of hardship from poverty. You're a mighty difficult customer to suit. You won't be a tradesman or a parson. You can't be a lawyer or a doctor or a gentleman because you've no money. I'd recommend you to travel. What? Without money? You must travel in search of money, man. You can speak French, with a vile English accent, no doubt. Still, you can speak it. Go on to the continent and see what will turn up for you there. God knows I should like to go, exclaimed I with involuntary ardor. Go! What the deuce hinders you? You may get to Brussels, for instance, for £5 or £6, if you know how to manage with economy. Necessity would teach me if I didn't. Go then, and let your wits make a way for you when you get there. I know Brussels almost as well as I know X, and I am sure it would suit such a one as you better than London. But occupation, Mr. Hunsden, I must go where occupation is to be had. And how could I get recommendation, or introduction, or employment at Brussels? There speaks the organ of caution. You hate to advance a step before you know every inch of the way. You haven't a sheet of paper and a pen and ink? I hope so. And I produced writing materials with alacrity, for I guessed what he was going to do. He sat down, wrote a few lines, folded, sealed, and addressed a letter, and held it out to me. There, Prudence, with a capital P. So he's calling William Prudence for taking this step. There's a pioneer to hoe down the first rough difficulties of your path. I know well enough, lad, you are not one of those who will run their neck into a noose without seeing how they are to get it out again. And you're right there. A reckless man is my aversion, and nothing should ever persuade me to meddle with the concerns of such a one. Those who are reckless for themselves are generally 10 times more so for their friends. This is a letter of introduction, I suppose, said I, taking the epistle. Yes, with that in your pocket, you will run no risk of finding yourself in a state of absolute destitution, which I know you will regard as a degradation. So should I, for that matter. The person to whom you will present it generally has 2 or 3 respectable places depending upon his recommendation. That will just suit me, said I. Well, and where's your gratitude? Demanded Mr. Hunsden. Don't you know how to say thank you? I've £15 in a watch, which my godmother, whom I never saw, gave me 18 years ago, was my rather irrelevant answer, and I further avowed myself a happy man, and professed that I did not envy any being in Christendom. But your gratitude? I shall be off presently, Mr. Hunsden. Tomorrow, if all be well. I'll not stay a day longer in Aix than I'm obliged. Very good, but it will be decent to make due acknowledgment for the assistance you have received. Be quick, it is just going to strike 7. I'm waiting to be thanked. Just stand out of the way, will you, Mr. Hunsden? I want a key there on the corner of the mantelpiece. I'll pack my portmanteau before I go to bed. The house clock struck 7. The lad is a heathen, said Hunsden, and taking his hat from a sideboard, he left the room, laughing to himself. I had half an inclination to follow him. I really intended to leave Aix the next morning, and should certainly not have another opportunity of bidding him good-bye. The front door banged to. Let him go, said I. We shall meet again some day. And that's the ominous ending of chapter 6. So for some reason, he did not want to thank Mr. Hunsden. He was being a bit of was a bit of out of caprice, out of a whim, that he did not want to thank Mr. Hunsden. But he did. Mr. Hunsden did him a very nice favor. So he wrote him a letter of introduction, and he's going to leave this sooty, mechanical, business-focused town and go to Brussels, where the next step of his adventure lies. So I hope you've enjoyed today's guided reading session. Next time we'll continue with reading chapter 7, 8, and 9. We're going to go to Belgium with William, our protagonist, with William Crimsworth. And as you know, as I've mentioned before, Charlotte Brontë went to Brussels with her sister Emily to study French and also to teach English at the Heger Institute, where she met Constantin Heger, who was a very important person for her, a figure of authority, an intellectual married man, and for whom she fell in love as a young girl. I read one extract of one of her letters to Constantin Heger on Instagram. So if you would like to see it, check one of the last posts on Instagram in which I do that. And you can see there are a lot of autobiographical elements here in William Crimsworth's journey and Charlotte Bronte's journey. All right, so we'll continue the reading of this novel next week, Thursday at 1 o'clock Central European Time. And I also hope to welcome you to the Jane Eyre course that starts on Monday. Michelle says this session was short and sweet this week. Next week we travel. Yes, I made a little mistake with the number of chapters. Usually we read 3 chapters, but we had already read number 4. But this is a good time to stop because next week we travel to Belgium with William Crimsworth. So I wish you all the best, and I'll talk to you next week, if not before, on Monday at our Jane Eyre course. Bye-bye.